If you're an athlete or weekend warrior suffering with an athletic or sports injury, I'm going to describe 7 of the most common reasons why athletic and sports injuries occur. Wearing the wrong shoes, or they're not wearing foot orthotics. So it all starts with our feet. The feet are the foundation of our human body. And so if we're wearing shoes or cleats that are worn out or they don't fit our foot's needs, commonly we'll see athletes compensate, and whether they be getting foot pain, knee pain, back pain. This is really just going to alter their mechanics and throw them out of alignment, which is going to make them have to work harder and potentially, set them up for a further injury. So a few things that we see amongst the feet is things to look for is when we have a foot, there's 2 terms we want to talk about is pronation and supination. So typically most athletes are in what they call a pronated position, and that's where the arches are collapsed. So this isn't a good position for the foot because then it causes the knees to cave in and then the hips to cave in, which then shuts off our muscles and our core muscles as well, and we can set ourselves up for a failure when we're doing our running, cutting, jumping, twisting, and changing of direction. Now the second type of foot we commonly see is called a supinated or pes cavus foot, and that's where the arches are going to be up really high. And so this type of foot is different than a pronated foot in that it can't absorb shock. So you'll usually hear a patient or an athlete coming when they're running down because they'll be clunking, and they don't have any shock absorption. So a lot of times those forces go up through the system into the knees, the hips, or the back, and that patient can get back pain or any sort of knee injury as well. So those are really the 2 things that we commonly want to be on the lookout. So if you've got high arch feet or flat feet, you want to make sure that you have the proper cleats, but you also may want to consider getting a foot orthotic to help you overcome or prevent a sports injury. Talk a little bit about why warming up is essential. So warming up is essential because it helps activate our nervous system. It then even increases blood flow to the muscles, but also then gives us the stability and mobility that we need to do certain positions without injuring us, and it warms up the tissues, the connective tissues, so that we can reach these different motions and positions. So a few things that we commonly see at Back in Motion Sport and Spine Physical Therapy for athletes in regards to athletic injuries in regards to warming up is that they don't warm up at all. They're doing static stretching instead of dynamic stretching. So those are the big reasons and errors that we commonly see amongst our athletes. So case in point, we want to basically do dynamic stretches instead of static stretches. And dynamic stretches would be skipping, lunging, twisting, and all these different functional movement patterns that's going to help increase our mobility, it's going to activate our nervous system, and it's also going to kind of help replicate some of the sport and activity that we're going to endure as an athlete. So the static stretching really isn't great for an athlete because it's going to diminish our power output, but it's also going to reduce some of the stability of the nervous system to help prevent an injury. So believe it or not, our nervous system is really important to controlling motion of our joints and muscles and protecting the body, and when we statically stretch, it kind of shuts that off. So that's why we typically don't want to static stretch prior to starting an athletic event or competition. So now let's take a look at some of the different athletic dynamic stretches that you could and should be performing. So the third thing that we commonly see amongst athletes and sports injuries is just inadequate nutrition and rest. There's 3 things that you need. You need good fats, you need good protein, and you need good carbohydrates. The second thing is just rest. So most athletes aren't getting adequate rest. They're on Instagram late or YouTube late at night, and they don't have a strict scheduled time that they're going to bed. And as a result, they're not getting that adequate rest that they need to allow their bodies to heal and recover. So a few things that you can do to help you get adequate rest would be to go set up a schedule where you go to bed at the same time. We want to make sure that you're sleeping in a cool room. Research shows that when you're in a cooler room, you're going to sleep better, but also shutting down the electronics and having the room dark. That also helps your sleep capacity as well. So those are the real things that we need to do from an athletic standpoint to allow proper rest. In regards to nutrition, you need to just do the basic things of drinking plenty of water, eating real food, real natural food that we were given on this earth. So don't eating things that are artificial, no sugars and sweeteners and that type of thing. So when you're shopping at the grocery store, you basically want to shop around the outside part of it, and that will showcase majority of the foods that an athlete will need and things that aren't artificial and etc. So the next error that we see athletes make on a day-to-day basis is not following a structured training program. And I can't stress this enough, whether that be practice or if you're in the off season. So what happens is when we're on a structured training program, we can progressively elevate the athlete's fitness and strength and conditioning levels. When we do too much too soon, let's say we've got a spike in distance that we ran or weight that we lifted or practice time, our injury rates are going to go through the roof and spike. So I can't stress this enough. If you're a coach reading this post or video, if you're an athlete or a parent, monitoring your athlete's progression and how much they're practicing, but also their strength and conditioning program is essential for them to overcome an injury. Because you can still do strength training and conditioning work, but if you're doing too much too soon, you're also going to jeopardize that athlete's injury, and he's going to be injured as a result. So there really is a fine line in a progression that we want to take when an athlete is trying to improve their fitness and performance levels, or even just as they're practicing as an athlete. The next most common reason why athletes get hurt is trauma. And a lot of this is outside of our control from a sports injury prevention side of things. So the most common things that we see are obviously torn ligaments, tendons, or even a broken bone. So commonly this is in sports that include contact sports of football, rugby, basketball, and that. So those are things we really are outside of our control. But what I can tell you is that there are some specific measures that you can take to help prevent that. One would be just strength training. So the stronger you are, the less likely your bones are going to break, the less likely you're going to tear a muscle, a tendon, or ligament. So I can't stress that enough. But also, like we alluded to in the last step here, was adequate rest and nutrition. If the athlete has adequate rest and nutrition, chances are they're going to be less likely of injuring a tendon, ligament, or a bone. So there you have it. Make sure that your athletes are strength training, but also making sure that they're having adequate nutrition and rest. And I think that will also help reduce their injuries from trauma. The sixth reason why athletes get injured is the biomechanical issues. And so what I'm talking about that is basically they're moving improperly or inefficiently. So in the case of like a golf player, when they're going to swing the golf club, if they don't have adequate mobility of their hips or trunk, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll get shoulder pain because they're cranking away too far. They may even get lower back pain because they don't have the mobility in their hips or their upper back, so they just torque at their back. And so that's really what we're talking about here in regards to a biomechanical error. Same thing goes for a pitcher. If a pitcher is getting ready to pitch and they don't have enough motion at their hip when they're pushing off, they're then going to just compensate and use their elbow and arm, and they may have to get a Tommy John surgery because they blew out their elbow or their shoulder. So these are the things we want to look at in regards to biomechanics from an athlete standpoint. Same thing goes for a runner. If they don't have adequate mobility of their hip joints, their ankle, or even in their upper back, they're going to compensate and get knee pain, plantar fasciitis, etc., etc. Most sports injuries occur because of lack of strength training. I can't stress this enough. Whether your child is in middle school, high school, we're talking about professional, collegiate, a lot of times injuries can be prevented with proper strength training. Strength training is so vital to an athlete's success, even if you are in a more endurance-based sport, because it's going to, strengthen all your connective tissue, as I mentioned in the other parts of this post. It's going to strengthen the fascia, it's going to strengthen the muscle, the tissue around the nerves, the bone, and that's going to help you reduce your chances for an injury. But it's also going to help you improve your performance level. It's going to help activate your nervous system so that you can produce force. You're going to be stronger, faster, and also potentially bigger if your sport needs that. So I can't stress that enough. Some of the common exercises that athletes need to perform in regards to strength training are just the basic things. And that would be, your bench presses, your push-ups, chin-ups, squatting, deadlifting, Olympic lifting, step-ups, all the basic things. You don't need a fancy workout regimen, but you need a structured workout regimen containing these core lifts. And over time, you're going to see adequate progress, not only in your strength and your performance, but also you're going to be less prone to a sports injury.